ethics for funders, and I want to be very clear on that, because it's not all about ethics. It's ethics for funders. I mean, what do they want from the researchers when applying for a grant? Um, we will divide this talk in two parts. The first part, where I will talk about the European Commission as a funder, and then Aurelia will talk about the NIH as funder, which are different requirements for the ethics, the proposals. So first of all, I will try to. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want I share?
If you have it open.
Yeah. If you want, I can share it.
Yeah. I can try again, but sorry, it's my computer.
Do you see something?
Yes, it's fine.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. So I will start talking about the difference between ethics and regulation, because it is important. We usually have a little bit of confusion on what is ethics and what is regulation, and what that the funders ask us in these terms. And then I'll talk, as I told you, about the ethical aspects for projects funded by the European Commission. Then Aurelia will talk about the NIH, and all the gender dimension part. The scientific integrity will be embedded in both presentations. Can you change the slide? So ethics is a branch of philosophy, and it tells us it's a moral statement. It tells us what should we do on anything, on everything. Ethics are ruled by a set of guidelines. The ethical decision-making process comes from a person's moral sense, and this got nothing to do with laws and policies. What regulations are? Policies is the law, and it tells us what can I do, and it gives us a set of rules and regulations, and laws. Something that is allowed by law is not necessarily ethical. So I'm giving you here an example. For example, driving carefully because you don't want to hurt someone is making a decision based on ethics. But when you're driving carefully within the speed limit because you don't want to break the law, because you're going to be punished for it, this is a law decision. It could have, it could have an ethical part on this decision, but it also is the law who doesn't allow you to go beyond the speed limit. So I know that there is a confusion on law and ethics, and as the same thing, with an excuse that if we're fulfilling our legal obligations, we can consider ourselves ethical. And you will see during our talk that ethics and regulation are very mixed within what the funders asks for us. I mean, it's not very easy to distinguish between the limits in ethical decisions and regulation. And you will see with the examples afterwards. Can you, next slide, please? So I will talk about the European Commission. I will explain very briefly what the Horizon Europe is, what the ethics background in Horizon Europe, what's the process of reviewing the ethical parts in Horizon Europe, that is called the ethics appraisal procedure. And then I'll talk a little bit about gender dimension. And then Aurelia talk about the NIH. Can you change the slide, please? Thank you. So very briefly, how it works, the European Commission funding. It works on framework programs. So from 2007 to 2013, it was the framework program 7, and then Horizon 2020, you have probably heard about it because it just ended, from 2014 to 2020. And then now we have Horizon Europe. And Horizon Europe, it is decided by 2-year work programs, meaning that every 2 years they decide what are the subjects that are going to be funded by the European Commission. Next slide, please. So this is the Horizon Europe is the most ambitious research and innovation funding program ever undertaken. It has a budget of 95.5 billion euros to the implementation of Horizon Europe. It is a continuity with Horizon 2020, but there are some novelties, some important things. There is a willing to promote citizen engagement through open science policies. There are innovation is part of Horizon Europe or with the European Innovation Council. There is something that is called the missions. I won't talk about that, but this will be part of Horizon Europe completely. And Horizon Europe is more open to international collaboration. Next slide, please. This is the structure of what I'm showing here is the structure of Horizon Europe, and we can find this more or less the same programs of Horizon 2020. If you have heard about Horizon 2020, Pillar 1 is the excellent science, and here we can find non-thematic goals, individual, that some are, as ERC. Some of the ERCs are individual or collaborative as well, and some Marie Curie's. Pillar 2, where we can find 6 different clusters on collaborative research funding, including the health cluster, which is the one that it's the more interesting to us. It has 8.24 billion euros, and the cluster to be implemented, and the cluster 3, which is the pillar dedicated mainly to innovation, and health is also present in this pillar. Yeah, what I wanted to say in my last slide, but very brief, is that when you apply for a call, you need to address ethics issues. It's mandatory. So I will talk to you then what is ethics in Horizon Europe. And in this slide, I'm just adding some key sources and materials on ethics. The first one is how to complete your ethics self-assessment, which is a guideline that the European Commission gives us to give the researchers to understand what is expected on the ethics self-assessment, on the ethics part of the proposals. And then you can find other legal and guidelines from the ethics from the Horizon Europe program guide. Then the guiding principles, next slide. Then the guiding principles on ethics is that ethics is an integral part of all research activities funded by the European Union. We need to be, projects need to be compliant in ethics, and the European Union thinks that this is pivotal to achieve real research excellence. It is based on the Article 19 that says that the ethics self-assessment is mandatory, and everyone that wants to participate in a project funded by the European Commission, it has to have an ethics self-assessment, and proposals should be screened to identify what they call the complex or serious ethics issues, and I will show you about that. You will understand what does it mean. And then it's an integrative part of the funding. So that means the ethics, it is inscribed in the model grant agreement. So every time you sign for a grant agreement to have the convention, to do the funding convention, ethics is part of this convention. So you will have ethics deliverables in the grant agreement. So you mean you are obliged to follow them. Next slide, please. There are some guiding principles. No, sorry. There are some actions that are not eligible for funding, which is the activities aiming to human cloning for reproductive purposes, research intended to modify genetic heritage, and research that involve the creation of embryos only for research, and of course the activities that lead to the destruction of human embryos. And this is the ethical part of grants are assessed by scientific evaluators, but who would screen the projects, saying that if the projects have complex or not complex ethics issues, and that they go to ethical evaluators. So I will start explaining what is the ethics appraisal procedure, which is the part of the evaluation procedure that talks about ethics. I mean, that is from the beginning of the proposal to the end of a project that was funded. And this is the process to assess and address the ethical dimensions of activities that were funded by the European Commission. It has three parts. The parts that is on the application, and there you have to fill in an ethics issues table in the administrative part of the application. Then what they call the ethics self-assessment that you have heard about a little just before. That means you are the one that auto-evaluate the ethics of your project. And then for those proposals that are shortlisted and before the grant agreement is signed, there is an ethics screening of all the proposals and an ethics assessment for all the proposals that have what they call the complex or serious ethics issues. And then for the projects that are funded, there is a third part that could be an ethics review asked by the European Commission, depending on the project. Next slide, please. This is the timeline of the ethics appraisal procedure. So mean that at the beginning, everyone has to fulfill the self-assessment, not only the table, but also the explanation of the ethics issues that are in the project. And then there's what they call, during the evaluation for the shortlisted proposals, there's what we call the screening. So the scientific evaluator screens if this project has complex issues, and there is an assessment that will be done afterwards. And during the grant preparation, we need to answer to these complex issues. And then there's a monitoring on the ethics part of the projects during the execution of the project, during the lifetime of the project. Next slide. So for the application part, you will see that there is an ethics issues table. Next slide, please. There's an ethics issues table that I'm showing you in this slide. In the proposal application form, there are a series of questions where the European Commission asks if you're using human embryos or human or data or whatever, and there's only questions. It's mandatory. It needs to be completed. It's an essential part of the proposal, and every time you say yes to one of these questions, you need to explain further. Next slide, please. So these are the questions that you can find in the table. These are all the subjects treated in the table. If you're doing research with human embryonic stem cells or human embryos, if you have human participants in your research, human cells or tissues, personal data, animals, if you have non-EU countries, for example, to import and export material from non-EU countries, environmental and health and safety issues. This is new to Horizon Europe. Artificial intelligence is one of the questions that was not present during Horizon 2020, and what they call the other ethics issues. And there is some ethics issues as misuse or dual use. We will have an example on that when Aurelia will talk about the NIH. Which are not part of the ethics issues self-assessment, but are part of another category which is important for the European Commission, which is the security appraisal procedure in the codes. But this is another part. So it is important. Artificial intelligence is a new ethic issue that we need to address in the proposals. And there are no laws ruling artificial intelligence. That's what I was telling you before. This is only ethics. There is a guideline done by the European Commission on how to address this issue. For example, questions that you need to address during the proposal, if the artificial system or techniques stigmatize or discriminate against people, depending on the sex, race, ethnic origin, etc., etc. This is one of the questions that we need to be addressed. or if the system interacts or replace or influence human decision-making processes. These are questions that we need to be addressed. But there is a new guideline on that, but no laws. That meaning that there are no real constraints. I mean, the only constraints are your design of your experiments. The next slide, please. This is the second part of the self-assessment that you need to fill in on the proposal application. A first part where you have to talk about ethics. I mean, all the methodology you're using, why are you using, what are your scientific objectives, and what I told you before, every time you say yes to one of the questions on the self-assessment table, you have to explain it here very briefly. And then in the second part, in the lower square, you need to talk about regulation. I mean, you really need to divide. I mean, if for example, you're going to use animals in your research, do you have the authorizations needed to use animals, etc., etc. This is very concise because it's only 5,000 characters, but you can explain further in an annex in the proposal, and we're expecting you to explain further. I mean, not just stay in this concise part of summary of the ethics issues. Next slide, please. So there, as I told you before, there's a guideline that was done by the European Commission, which explains very explicitly how to complete your ethics self-assessment. The link is here. This guideline is, I mean, if you have downloaded one of the guidelines, every time you make a new proposal, please go and look and be sure then this is the last version of the guideline because it is updated regularly by the European Commission. And this is how it looks. I mean, it says, okay, if you have answered yes to the utilization of human embryonic stem cells, what is the information that need to be provided in the proposal? I mean, all the questions that you need to address, if applicable, of course, and then all the documents you need to provide to show that you fill in all the regulations. Next slide, please. So during the lifetime of the projects, as I told you, there is the proposal that are shortlisted by the scientific evaluators. Next slide. This is the part when we pre-screen or screen to identify complex issues in the proposals. Next slide. So the experts screen all the proposals to identify the ethics issues. So if we do not identify any ethics issues, the proposal is cleared. So that means that the ethics questions are well addressed and there are no complex issues identified. This is very important because if we address the ethics issues part in the proposal and in the annex, well, with all the authorizations needed, etc., related to your research, you can be clear from the beginning of your project, which is a very good thing. Then there are some projects that are what they call flagged on ethics issues. That means mainly that the ethics questions were not well addressed on the proposal. And that means there will be a screening report given by the European Commission, by the ethics experts. And then you will have to fill some ethics deliverables that will be in the grant agreement. And then there are those projects that will be flagged as projects with serious or complex ethics issues. And all these projects will go through ethics assessments. So meaning that if it is different from what it was done in Horizon 2020, it means that we trust what you do if you address the ethics issues. For example, I used the example on animals. Let's say that we're still using animals for research and we really address the methodology and everything that has to do with ethics on the animal part of our experiments. Then we add also in the annex all the authorizations needed, etc., from the utilization of animals, for example, GMO, etc. If this is well addressed in the proposal, so you won't have any problem with the ethics. But if you don't address very well this part, which are the easiest part, let's say like that, you will be flagged. And what animals are not complex, are not serious and complex ethics issues. But for the first part, could be easier if you address well on the proposals or the ethics issues. Then next slide, please. What does it mean, the ethics, the serious and complex issues? There's, this is not exhaustive. There's a long list of what we call the serious and complex issues that is given by the European Commission, and you can find it in the guideline. But for example, if you're using human embryonic stem cells or human embryos for your research, you will be directly considered as a project with serious and complex ethics issues. For example, when research proposals have the potential to violate fundamental rights and freedoms or undermine fundamental EU values, when one example is when you are working with non-EU countries, for example, it doesn't say in this list, but when you're working with non-EU countries that do not have the same European directives, probably they could be considered, these proposals could be considered as proposals with serious and complex ethics issues, etc. This is something that you can see, the exhaustive list, you can look at it at the ethics self-assessment guide from the European Commission. Next slide. So that means that a proposal that goes through the scientific evaluation was shortlisted, and it doesn't have any ethics issues. There's an ethics clearance and everything is okay from the beginning to the end of the project. Then the proposals are flagged because you didn't address very well the ethics issues in your proposal. To go through an ethics advisor or an ethics review can be requested, or can be requested also an ethics and external ethics board to review your project at some point of the lifetime of the project if you want to be funded. Then there are the projects that are considered or as complex or with serious ethics issues. For example, as I told you, the human embryos or human embryo stem cells, but other issues as well. Those projects will go through ethics assessment. If everything is sufficiently addressed during the assessment, you will go through an ethics advisor, or they will ask for an ethics advisory board to be part of the project. Yeah, you will have a conditional clearance. And if the project with these complex and serious ethics issues do not fulfill all the ethics sufficiently, the proposal can be rejected. And even if when you are applying for a European proposal, if the ethics part of your proposal is not complete, you can still apply for this grant. But I can tell you that I have seen projects that were rejected because they didn't address very well the ethics part in the proposals when they were shortlisted. So this is something you need to think about whenever you apply for a grant. So don't leave it at the end. Just whenever you apply for a grant, please think about the ethics issues, and it can probably modify your research or not, but just think about it, what you need to do afterwards. Next slide, please. So we at the grants office, what do? Well, we help the researchers to identify all these complex issues. And what we do is imagine, we ask them to fill in the table, and we have imagined if if you answer yes to all the questions, what the explanation should be for an ethics issues annex. Next slide. I'm going to talk about gender dimension in European Commission funded projects. This is a very important part on the European Commission on the new projects Horizon Europe. It has been implemented since a long time in other framework programs, but now is more important than ever. We need to include what we call the gender equality plan. I mean, this is mandatory for projects funded from 2022. I will talk to you about the gender equality plan. Maybe you have heard already about that. You need to integrate the gender dimension to your research, meaning, I mean, you need to, if you're using, let's say, cells coming from men or women, why are you using these cells coming from men or woman, etc., etc. I mean, of course, related to the scientific questions. And also, what is a ranking criteria is the gender balance in the research teams. Next slide. As I told you, the gender equality plan is mandatory from the 2022 projects that are part of the Horizon Europe funding scheme. This is a public document. It has to be. It has to have a dedicated web page. You have to have the institutions have to have dedicated resources to the gender equality plan. There should be a data collection and monitoring plan as well, and training and capacity building related to these issues. At Institut Pasteur, there is a working group working on gender equality. So why do we need, these are the important questions. Why do we need to integrate the gender dimension into research and innovation? Is because every cell is sex and every person is gender. It brings added value to your research. It brings an in-depth understanding of all people's needs, behaviors, and attitude. There are some more in the European Horizon Europe funded projects. There is a need to include the social dimension of the research. So this is very important for gender dimension. And there, as I told you, there's the ranking criteria for proposals. For example, if you're adding working workpacker leaders, are they women or men? Why are you including men or women depending on the aspects of the call? And finally, I really recommend to read further on the documentation. There is this report that is called She Figures to 2028 on the European research area. It is very, very interesting on the gender inequalities and all the research that the European Commission has done on the gender dimension aspects of the research. And thank you, and I leave the floor to Aurelia. Thank you, Aurelia, for passing by the.
Thank you, Valia. So good morning, everyone. So I will talk today about ethics in NIH grants. So, sorry. I will present you first the NIH guiding principles. Then I will present you what you need to do for ethics in application and during the award. And finally, with Vania, we will present you 2 examples of what we can call ethic issues. So NIH guiding principle. So just to sum up what is the NIH for those of you who are not used to. The NIH is the National Institute of Health. It's the primary agency of the United States government responsible for biomedical research and public health research. So the NIH has 2 major activities. It conducts its own scientific research. Is the intramural research program, and it also provides major biomedical research funding by its extramural research program. So the NIH is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, around 32 billion USD per year. And the main goal of the NIH is to enhance life, reduce illness and disability for the American people. So the NIH is made out of 27 thematic institutes and centers. You have the scheme here on the slide. And each center, institute, has its own agenda and own research topic. So most of the grants here at Institut Pasteur from the NIH is coming from NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. So, as Vanya said you before, there is a difference between ethics and the policies, rules, regulations. So, few definition: ethics is a moral principle that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity, and the policies are the course or principle of action proposed by an organization or individual. So, for the NIH, the ethics word is not really used. And NIH use policies to regulate ethical principles during guiding the research. And all NIH policies are available in a big guide called NIH Grants Policy Statement. And it includes ethical policies, but also other policies and regulations. So I will present you a few policies with an ethical aspect close to the European Commission ones. The human subject protection, this policy is guided by a regulation of HHS. It's a human health service from United States. And it's provide internationally recognized ethical principles to safeguard the rights and welfare of individuals who participate as subjects in research activities. This policy includes inclusion policies to guide research for inclusion of individuals of all sexes, genders, races, ethnicities, and ages, and also regulate the human stem cell research for responsible and worthy research. There is also animal welfare policies to ensure the human care and use of animals in research. There is a policy on research integrity because NIH expects that each institution receiving funds promote research integrity in the institution and in research projects. There is a policy that is called financial conflict of interest. This is also based on law, responsibility of applicant for promoting objectivity in research. And this is actually a policy from NIH they expect that the design, conduct, reporting of the research funding by NIH will be free from bias by any conflicting financial interest of the investigators. There is also national environment policy required the investigator to explain what could be the impact of the research on the environment. So among this policy, what is prohibited, what we cannot do when you are funded by NIH. So you cannot use create a human embryo for research purposes. And you cannot destroy, discard, and injure these embryos. The gene editing technologies in human embryos are also forbidden. And the cloning of human beings, it's also prohibited by NIH. Regarding the stem cell research, it is not possible with NIH funds to use stem cells, pluripotent stem cells, human, for introduction into non-human primate blastocysts and to use them to contribute to the germline. So this is the same rules as for European Commission. So what you will have to address in the application and during the award. So during the cycle life of NIH award, during the application, you will have to address ethical issues in each part of the application, and there is no specific section dedicated to ethics. It will be inside each part of the application. During the just-in-time, which is a transition period just before the award, you will have to answer some questions and to check for your assurances, institutional assurances about human subjects, animals, research integrity. This is a responsibility for Institut Pasteur, not the researchers, to have this assurance. The researcher will need to follow trainings, and for your research, you will need to obtain IRB and ethical committee for human subject research and animal research. And during the award, of course, you will have to comply with all NIH policies and renew assurances if necessary. This is also the responsibility of institution. So first in the application, so here you can see a table of contents of what is of the NIH application. And there is different part where you will have to address ethical issues. First, a part with some questions, and secondly, you will have to explain your protocol for clinical research and your protocol for animal research if you use them. So here is the basic question you can have. So one from for human subject and for animal use. And you will here need to provide institutional assurance numbers. And right now at Institut Pasteur, we have already active assurance for human subject, animal vertebrate, and so on. There is also the question about the impact on the environment of your research. We'll have some question about stem cells and human fetal tissue. So you will have to say yes or no. And if you say yes, also you need to provide the institutional assurance number. Really, there is two parts where you have to explain your protocol. The human subject protocol if you do human subject research. And here inside this part, you will address inclusion policies for inclusion of individuals across the lifespan and inclusion of women and minorities in your clinical research. For the vertebrate animal, there is also a part when you will have to justify why you use animals and not an alternative model, and also saying that for euthanasia of animals, you follow the guidelines, American guidelines. Finally, in the application, you have to address what we call rigor and reproducibility. And this is not in a specific section, but it's in the entire proposal. You need to address that components that actually are evaluated by the reviewers when they look at your proposal. So it is really important. In the research strategy, which is the part with your research project, your research plan, you need to address rigor of the prior research, rigor of the proposed research, and the choice of your biological variables in your research. And in a specific section called authentication, you will have to describe the methods you use to ensure the identity and validity of your key resources used in the project, like cell lines or whatever. After that, at the beginning and during the award, you will have to comply with all NIH policies, checked or ask for new institutional assurance. So it is Institut Pasteur which is responsible for that, and not the PI, not the researcher. If you use vertebrate animals, you will ask for ethical review and validation of your protocol. And this is actually something that is already done inside Pasteur with the CTA, the Comité d'Expérimentation Animale. If you have human subject research, you will ask ethical review as well by what we call IRB for Institutional Review Board. And here at Pasteur, there is an IRB, and they review protocols once a month. And you will have to follow training on human subject. For the financial conflict of interest, actually, you have to follow your institutional policy, declare each year your financial conflict of interest regarding your research, and follow the training. And for research integrity as well, you have to follow your institutional policy. And the NIH require that all institutions receiving funds have a procedure to handle allegations of research misconduct, and also follow the trainings if available on research integrity. So we will present you two examples. So first, the example of dual-use misuse. So as we said before, ethics is different from regulation. So when you apply for a grant to a specific funder, of course, you have to follow the rules, the policies, including all policies on ethical aspects. But beyond the policies and the regulation, you have to ask a question about your research. Can I do that type of research? Is my scientific concept moral? And some ethical question that you can have on your research. And for example, if you want to do research and to be quite free to achieve your scientific goals. So your research must be transparent, and you will present your results in publication and explain what you did. But sometimes your results can be misused and can lead to risk of something that you think is a neutral research. And the example is that if you want to work, for example, on a biological agent or a toxin, and you want to understand molecular pathways, or I don't know, and you will modify them, and actually it will have an impact on the immunity or the resistance to prophylaxis or therapeutic intervention against that agent. So for you, it's something you do because you want to understand how it works, but it could be misused by others and could be, for example, used as a biological weapon. So you always have to think when you do research of what are the regulation, of course, but what you want to do, and is it ethical or not? And research must be actually regulated by legal, but also ethical limitations. Vanya will present you this example.
So I will talk about this is our last slide, and then we can continue. Can you close your mic?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And then we will continue with the discussion. But this is a story of the man with the golden cells. That's why it's called John Moore. Who was diagnosed with hereditary leukemia, which is a very rare cancer, and it has a swollen spleen. So the doctor took his spleen off, and he asked for a written consent form. And the consent form is something that has, I mean, it's a regulatory requirement. Every time you do something to a human subject, you have to ask for a consent form authorizing the procedure. Then this doctor found that his spleen contained unique blood cells that produce a type of protein that stimulates the growth of white blood cells that can help to fight infections. And he established a cell line that is called MO, which is a patented line. So John Moore realized that this line existed coming from his spleen, and he sued the doctor for culturing and patenting the cells. And what happened is that the justice acknowledged that he was not adequately informed, because the consent forms, the consent need to be what they call informed. I mean, exhaustive. The doctors, according to the law, um, should have said, "I'm going to do this with your cells. I'm going to establish a cell line," or look for John Moore afterwards and saying, "I'm going to establish a cell line with your spleen cells." That he did not. But the justice considered that if John Moore was the owner of his cells, he was considered as his body belongs to him, and he could take his organs, his cells, and that goes against an ethics principle, which is the human dignity. So he couldn't get any money from the cell line that was established. So these two last examples. So just to exemplify that there's a very thin line between the regulation and ethics, and every time you need to think about your research, you need to take into account both things, ethics and regulation. And that's all. We're open for questions.
Thank you.
No questions?
Either you are bored, you understood everything. Don't worry, your next exercise will be about ethics.
Institutional insurance.
Yeah, probably something that we didn't say very explicit is that as the last slide Aurelia showed on NIH about what for every step for animal welfare you need to go and see the CTA, etc., and ask for authorizations and all that. And just to let you know that the independent of the funder, everything that has to do with regulation, it comes from the local authorities. I mean, this is the French directives are the most important, and then the European directives. Even if the NIH asks for specific things, it's the French directives that are the priority. I don't know if I was clear with that, with that phrase, but
Yes, I mean, it was clear for me. So just to say that the institutional assurance for NIH is something that, as Vanya said, the NIH requires. So it's just something that the Institut Pasteur does. It's not the responsibility of the PI. We need to have some number assurance. It is for 4 or 5 years. Just from the institution responsible for human subject research, or the legal, it's not legal, but the institution from NIH that regulates policies on this subject. But beside that, you will have to follow European rules and also national rules. So it's something that NIH asks beside the rest. Yes, I don't know if it's clear.
yeah,
But,
yeah. For example,
something that is the responsibility of Institut Pasteur, and in the grants office, we know the numbers, we know if the assurance is valid or if we need to renew, and it's not something that the researcher needs to take care of that. Yeah.
yeah, one another example is, for example, animals. When working with animals, the authorizations to work with animals for the protocols and everything are the same, independent if it's NIH or the European Commission. Is the French authorities that ruled us that, and we're going to give the funders the same authorizations.
Yes, exactly.
I have a question. How do you give the assurance to a applicant? Do you read his proposal first?
No. Actually, you just need to say that Institut Pasteur is registered, and you give the number. It's really not something that is actually it's something the Institut Pasteur needs to be registered for NIH, and this is something for the institution, and you need to just provide the number, and and in the other part of the application where you give your protocol for animals, here they will review if your protocol is okay or not, and this is something different. As Vanya said, the protocol will be reviewed by the reviewers, of course, and after, if you are awarded, you will have to provide the approval of the ethical committee from Pasteur. And beside that, you just need to have your institution registered for NIH. So it's just only the number you need to give. And we, as a grants office, we have the number, and we can just give to the PI, this is this number and this number, okay?
We have a question.
This is only for one institution. So it's only for Institut Pasteur Paris. So each institution who wants to receive grants from NIH needs to have a registration to have this number. But it's covered for all the Institut Pasteur Paris labs. So I'm not sure for the UBI, but
Yeah, but this is, I mean, just to clarify to Cody for his question, on animals, on animal research, regarding the institutional assurance, this is only for NIH. As Aurelia said, each institution has ethics committees for animal protocols that authorize the animal protocols, and the French law says that we need to have an authorization for this protocol. So the first step is the ethics committees, institutional ethics committees authorizations, which is a kind of first okay for the research. And then the French law says you need to have an authorization for these protocols. And this is not an insurance, it's an authorization from the French ministry.
Yeah.
No more questions? If that's the case, just some information about the module 5, which we will be doing on the 10th of November regarding the small exercise we're going to ask you to do. Olivier is connected and he's going to just give you some information on this. Thanks, Olivier.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Yes, so we planned a short exercise homework for you. So basically the way it will work is that we will send you today template, which is the template for the Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship. And we will ask you to organize yourselves in groups. So initially, we assumed you would be 15 people joining, and we thought 5% per group, so we would have 3 groups. I'll let it up to you to organize yourself for that, and we would like you to have a look at the proposal, at the template, think about it, and prepare a presentation for the 10th of November. So, because actually you will be the ones presenting, and we will highlight a number of elements that we would like to see in the presentation, and those elements are elements you've learned about in the previous presentations. There won't be ethics, don't worry. So today you will receive this email, and if you have questions, you can ask us. But basically, we would like you to exercise and imagine a project and imagine how it would look like in terms of Gantt chart, milestones, and so on, and all those concepts you've learned before. I don't know if you have questions.
And yeah, and just to add a few words on what Olivier said, don't worry. It's the first time many of you are doing this exercise. Do not spend too much time on it. We will really give you information on what we expect for this small presentation.
Yes.
So no stress. We are here. It's really an exercise to communicate with you and help you draft all this based on what you have seen till now.
Yeah, and if you can, even try to have fun doing it and imagining a fictional project.
I had one question. You said in some of the presentation slide that there's a training on human subject that people can follow. Do you know where they can find that?
Actually, this is something that the NIH provide online. This is only necessary if you are awarded by your NIH grant and if you have human subject research in your project. So, but actually NIH has a lot of online trainings where you have explanation. It's always in video or PowerPoint, and after you have some questions to validate what you look at. And actually we propose them only when there is an NIH grant accepted, but actually yes, everybody can go on the website and see if there is something interesting for us.
This is different from the requirement for France. If you want to do research on animal, you need to have a experimenter training certificate.
Yes, it's different because really it's the
before
American,
you apply.
training. Yes,
Yeah.
it's really not the same, but it's something that will be done if you have NIH. But of course, you will have to follow the national guidelines. So you will have to have your training if it's needed in France. I'm not yes, I don't remember how. And after that, if you have the NH grants, you will have to do also the training for NH grants.
Okay. For the new section of ethics on AI, and also on personal data, how do you recommend, because we are going to be getting closer to Université de Paris, and many people will be doing research on social and SHS, sciences humaines et sociales, social sciences, so about epidemiology, acceptance of vaccines and things like this. What will be the requirement when you apply for funding for this?
I mean, there are on the questions on the personal data, there are very specific questions if you're using how many human subjects, what type of data are you collecting, if it's personal data, if you're going to anonymize the data or pseudo-anonymize the data, etc., etc., etc. So depending on your answers is what you need to, I mean, if you are, for example, pseudo-anonymizing the data, it will be easier to go further that if you need to collect personal data, data that can identify someone afterwards, for example. There are in the institutions, it's part of the RGPD directive, which is European-wide, to have a DPO, a data protection officer in every institution. And for example, in Pasteur, there is one. In Université de Paris, there is one. So the idea, but I mean, it's almost never the case. The idea will be to do it by design again, you know, do data by design, or what is the data that you need to collect and how you're going to use it, how you're going to share it, etc., etc. Before, a lot before your project starts. Talk
So
to the
is there similar to the number that you provide for animal experiments? Is there a data number?
No, there is
Protection number?
no, there is no authorization or anything. I mean, there are only questions. Meaning, whenever you um, whenever you I mean, you need to follow the RGPD. So whenever you decide to use personal data, collect data from human subjects, you need to fill in some legal rules, meaning that you need to declare it to the CNIL, for example, depending on the data you're going to declare, etc., etc. But there is no one authorization saying your data is compliant with the RGPD. That doesn't exist in reality. But you need to fill
But
in.
how do you write that in your ethics part for your EU application? Is there how do you know that you have to do all these things?
But it says on the guideline, or I mean, when you are a pastor, we help you with the questions. I mean, saying you need to address this question. Do not forget to address this.
Okay.
If you do not have someone helping you on the ethics, in the European guideline, you can have all the questions. I mean, that said as well, address this question as this. I mean, you have to explain this part as this. You have to explain this other part as this.
Grant office will give the link to the DPO.
Exactly.
All these
Exactly.
things that
Yeah,
are required.
exactly. I mean,
Okay.
at Pasteur we do exactly like that. I mean, when the researcher says that they're gonna use data and they have replied yes to some of the questions, we know which are the questions that the EC are expected to be addressed. So we ask the researcher to address these questions. And if we have any doubt or anything, we can sometimes we ask some advice from the CRT, for example, which from the clinical part of Pasteur, you know, when they have more information on the data and on the authorizations that need to be asked for the data.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Deshmukh, if I may just add, you know, as researchers, you know what you are writing in your project. And what Vanya has shown, I mean, for the European side, that was your question. You have this list on the EC portal, whereby each time you say yes, they will give you some information on what you need to answer. So yes, the grants office will help you, but you need, as a researcher, to take some time and go through the list first. And of course, if you have doubts about what they are asking, then the grants office, you can ask information, I mean, more feedback from the grants office. And of course, as Vanya has said, we know the links about different services of Pasteur, and then we will help you draft this part. But of course, we will not write it on your behalf. Yeah.
I was thinking of the PhDs who don't know how this works. Maybe they should learn from maybe their PI a little bit. I mean, there has to be some kind of how do you say, mise en marche, you know, somebody has to help you a little bit.
Yeah, and I agree. For example, for PhDs, I mean, all the authorizations and everything. I mean, the labs have them already, so it would be nice to discuss with the PIs. You are completely right.
And not be surprised when you are publishing your thesis at the end after 3 years that you missed this authorization from the very beginning. So you use all these red blood cells. You don't know where they came from. Moore's cells, you know, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, for example, and yeah, this is something that we see sometimes, as you say, that there is people that use cells, you know, that been there for ages and they don't even know if they have the import or the export or the stock authorization. So you are completely right.
See.
So no more questions. Then we can wrap the session if that's fine with everyone. So thank you, everyone. We have the list of participants today. So as Olivier said, we are just going to reconfirm the list, and then by the end of the day, we are going to send you the instructions for the exercise for the module 5. And you have module 4 in next week. You have, I mean, for the PhD candidates who are here, you have the module 4 on data management and this, and I forgot, but it's next week. So thank you, everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.